Hello, dear viewers. Support me by subscribing to my channel and share my video if you like it. And also, make sure you comment your thoughts. Now let's start the video. Harry stared at the devastation that graced his eyes. All around him, earth was crumbling from within. Not once had he imagined he would bear witness to the destruction of his home planet. At the precipice of the final chapter of his life, he thought of the long-lost past and everything that led to this moment. After he had defeated Voldemort at Hogwarts, he had tried to return the Elder Wand to Dumbledore's grave. On the 7th day, he found the Elder Wand in his room at Grimmauld Place. Even the Resurrection Stone had magically appeared beside the Elder Wand. The presence of 2 Hallows made him concerned. One day, he took all 3 Hallows and was about to bury them in Ignotus Peverell's grave. But just before he could do so, the Hallows dissolved into his body. The resulting magical backlash, courtesy of the unexpected phenomena, had knocked out the entire Floo network of magical Britain. After that debacle, he found he could perform magic without his wand. Magic came to him as easily as breathing, and he could feel no exhaustion or resistance from the magic coursing through his body. He kept what happened with the Hallows to himself. He didn't even mention this to Hermione and Ron. Instead, he conjured a piece of wood in the likeness of the Elder Wand and placed it inside Dumbledore's grave. With all the chaos that was going on in the wizarding world, his decision to keep his new status as the Master of Death a secret was a wise move. The wizarding world of Britain was in shambles. The entire ministry apparatus of magical Britain had fallen to Voldemort, and in the wake of his demise, everything fell apart. The victors of Hogwarts had the daunting task of rounding up all the Death Eaters. There was also the part where the ministry had to be rebuilt from scratch. Harry would have liked to leave all the rebuilding business to Kingsley Shacklebolt, but he was reminded of the past when the Death Eaters got free through bribes. So he rolled up his sleeves and stepped to the forefront of dismantling the whole Blood Purist faction. The first thing that he did was to storm Azkaban with the help of the Order and release all Muggle-born and Half-Blood prisoners. Many of them readily joined his side to bring an end to all the pure-blood bullshit once and for all. After a few weeks of recuperation, they attacked the ministry and put everyone there in prison. Many of them protested, but Harry was having none of it, especially after he saw and heard from the Muggle-borns that were sentenced to Azkaban. Many of their families were killed or tortured. Most of the women were raped by these so-called purebloods. He spoke personally with each victim, and he was adamant about bringing the full might of justice upon those responsible. Every wizard and witch who worked in the ministry was questioned under Veritasarum. Those who were found guilty of colluding with Death Eaters were transferred to ministry, holding cells pending further trial. The Death Eaters that were being slowly weeded out were sentenced to Azkaban, and their assets seized to reimburse their victims for the ordeal they went through. The goblins tried to protest, but one visit from Harry saw to it that the little buggers bowed before his orders. While this was going on, many pureblood families banded together to push their agenda to disrupt the remodeling of the wizarding world. He put a stop to that by arresting every single one of them, as he was ruthless against his enemies. Their family manors were put under siege by the new Oro force that Harry had built up. The Oro force was filled with Muggle-borns and half-bloods, with a few purebloods in between. With overwhelming force, he subjugated families like Nott, Carrows, MacNair, Bulstrode, Rockwood, etc. He did not stop at merely arresting them. He had their entire family homes looted and forced the goblins to turn over their fortunes to the ministry. The extra flush of gold was a godsend, and he used it to reform the ministry and provide assistance to the victims of the war. It took him 2 long years to bring a semblance of normalcy to magical Britain. It was no easy task, but he managed to reform the Wizengamot into a more balanced governing body. He received aid in that venture from a most unlikely group. A group of pure-blood houses had banded together and stayed neutral throughout the war. They were led by Damian Greengrass, and the good news was that the guy was willing to work with Harry in rehauling the ministry, but only for a price. The price was a marriage alliance. Damian wanted his eldest daughter, Daphne Greengrass, to become the wife of the new leader of magical Britain. Not to mention, the man wanted explicit influence in the way educational reforms ought to be implemented. According to Damian, the wizarding culture was under attack by the Muggle-borns, who were piling up, and their lack of integration into the world was causing fissures in their society. While Harry was skeptical of Damien's objectives, they talked in detail about many of his concerns. Harry personally disagreed with many of Damien's policies. Having said that, he felt the man offered him a fresh perspective on a segment of the pureblood cause. Damien was not that much interested in blood purity. Rather, he was focused on preserving the culture and traditions of the British wizarding world. He was all too happy and insistent on having Muggleborns and half-bloods be part of the culture rather than being excluded from society. The last 2 years after the war of Harry's stay in the wizarding world jaded him. He was no longer the naive Gryffindor that jumped at the slightest provocation. He knew that he needed to secure peace and stability in Britain as fast as possible. He agreed to Damien's proposal and made Daphne his wife. While the marriage was on a political basis, both of them committed themselves to working out their relationship. Of course, many were not happy with what he did, and chief among them were the Weasleys. For the next 10 years, Harry ruled Britain with an iron fist. He smashed the corrupt beast of the previous administration and established a system of meritocracy to build the ministry. In his 1-decade rule, he expanded the wards around magical Britain as he had a feeling that something was brewing right around the corner. Unfortunately, this bad feeling just remained a feeling throughout his tenure as Minister for Magic. After spending a decade of his life in the halls of power of magical Britain, he retired to civilian life, preferring the company of his wife and 2 daughters. He was the youngest wizard and the longest-serving wizard to hold that office. His father-in-law tried to persuade him to stay in the office, but Daphne managed to talk her father out of that, as she preferred to have Harry home, now that they had children to raise. She had become enamored with the Potter charm after a decade of married life. Now that he was voluntarily returning, she preferred to have Harry all for herself and her children. With his retirement, he concentrated on completing his new eats, which he had abandoned in his pursuit of rebuilding magical Britain. He didn't attend Hogwarts again, but rather took the exam independently. With that part of his education over, he was planning to write a book on defense against the dark arts. But he was offered a position in the Department of Mysteries. Daphne was the one who insisted that he join the department as he could further his magical knowledge. Seeing the idea had its merit, he accepted the offer. These were the best years of his life as he researched obscure magic in the Dom and returned to the warm embrace of his family. Sadly, these good days were not to last. Just as his instincts implied, something really bad happened in the Muggle world. The Muggles, with the aid of advanced technology, managed to find the hidden magical enclaves all across the world. The Muggle governments at first tried to keep the news from leaking out into the public, but this was a wasted effort. By the year 2017, almost all Muggle governments acknowledged the presence of magical enclaves in the world. There was quite a bit of fear and equal amounts of curiosity among the Muggle population of the world. The Muggle governments of many great democracies had successfully implemented the separation of church from state. So no more witch burnings and honor killings were favored by any world governments. Owing to the rather benign reaction despite the exposure, the ICW passed a resolution to make overtures to the Muggle public. This decision led to the Free Terra Pact that guaranteed fundamental rights to Muggles and Magicals in either world. Slowly, the magical world began to open itself up to the Muggles. The ICW and the UN framed the basic laws and norms that framed the basis for coexistence. The magical lands were far minuscule compared to the vast lands controlled by Muggles. Some more laws and frameworks had to be implemented for safe coexistence, but Harry was pleasantly surprised that Western civilization easily accepted the existence of a new species. It was not to say there were elements of concern, but the dilution of Greek influence in Christianity certainly helped matters. The Christianity of the Dark Ages was not the Christianity of the Millennium. If anything, the discovery of a new species seems to have dissolved the hold of religion in the world in egalitarian societies. Unfortunately, this was not a common phenomenon. Large tracts of Western Europe remained largely not bothered by the discovery of magical kind, but religion and bigotry held much larger sway in Eastern Europe, the Middle East, and the Americas. The ICW came to the decision that individual magical enclaves have the right to determine whether they choose to engage with their Muggle counterparts. The magical communities of the Americas, Middle East, Asia, and Western Europe closed down their borders with harsh wards. Western Europe, on the other hand, increased collaboration between their different communities. From these political differences, Harry found himself unable to age like others. At first, it was not much of an issue, as wizards and witches age far more slowly than muggles, but it eventually reached a point where his body remained in a permanent state, as if he were in his 20s. Even as his wife and children aged, he remained young and strong. He had to depend on some wide use of glamour charms to alleviate suspicion. He even had to fake his death after Daphne passed away. After making sure his children and grandchildren remained safe after his demise, he went along on a journey. He traveled the known world, and already he could see muggles were destroying nature in their bid to dominate the planet. They bred like rats, exhausting and polluting the resources of the planet. It came to a point where the world nations began to fight for basic resources like water. It is not that water began to suddenly disappear from the planet altogether. It is just that, as the number of cities began to increase, water began to disappear from the urban areas. It didn't help the coastal areas were no longer safe to live in as the sea level rose steadily over the years. Gigantic storms began decimating the cities, and yet the Muggles never learned. The Muggles refused to give up their polluting ways and began demanding the Wizarding World fix the planet. It was a demand the Wizarding World was quite adamant to ignore. Then war broke out in Western Europe over resources, and for the first time, the magical world decided to do away with the Muggles. The war was first fought between Ukraine and Russia, but it devolved into Muggles versus Wizards in the span of a few months. Harry personally partook in the war under a different identity. It did not take too long for other nations to get involved. Within a year, the world was at war, spurred on by a lack of resources, politics, racism, and the need for a new world order. With essential resources becoming scarce, the war only made the situation worse for the inhabitants of Terra. The World War destabilized the planet in ways that Harry never thought possible. The use of nuclear weapons triggered more disasters and consumed large parts of the planet in nuclear winter. Other natural disasters only accelerated the near-total annihilation of the planet. Even magic began to disappear from the world altogether. But Harry managed to sustain his magic. The years he had lived had only accelerated his power and healing abilities. The reason he had joined the war in the first place was so that he could die in the field of battle. He didn't have it in him to commit suicide, but a warrior's death was preferable. Unfortunately, a bullet to his head or heart no longer ensured him the gift of death. With the world on the brink of a cataclysmic disaster, he was no close to finding a solution to his death. It was at this point he decided to try the Veil of Death. All the research on the Archway in the Department of Mysteries had let him learn the Archway was a portal to where remained a mystery. But it was a portal unlike any other. The only thing he knew for sure is that anything that enters the Archway never comes back. With his world's destruction inevitable, he decided to take his chances on the Veil. On 1st September of the year 2075, Harry stepped into the Veil of Death, disappearing from the world altogether. Eddard Stark was tired. Oh, so tired. He was tired of war. He never imagined all that would happen in the last 2 years. It all started with that godforsaken tourney of Harrenhal. In the beginning, it was a tourney like any other. He was not so fond of tourneys, but Robert was so fond of tourneys. Besides, Lord Arryn was going to the tourney, and his father, along with his siblings, was also expected to be present. He went to Harrenhal, and at that time, he never knew it would be the last time he would interact with his family jovially. Rhaegar Targaryen, the crown prince of the Targaryen dynasty, won the tourney and crowned his little sister as his queen of love and beauty over the prince's own wife. It was a pivotal moment, and the prince later absconded with Lyanna. Eddard's elder brother, Brandon Stark, and many of his friends rode into the Red Keep, demanding Rhaegar's head for kidnapping Lyanna. The Mad King responded by throwing his brother into the Black Cells. The Mad King executed many of those who accompanied Brandon. Eddard's father, Rickard Stark, traveled to King's Landing and appealed to the mercy of King Aerys Targaryen. His father's pleas fell on deaf ears, prompting Lord Rickard to ask for a trial for Brandon. For this reason, the Mad King had his father burned to death, while Brandon choked himself to death trying to save his father. The Mad King then sent ravens to the Eyrie, ordering Lord Jon Arryn to deliver Robert's and Eddard's heads. An order the Honorable Lord of House Arryn refused to comply. Instead, Lord Arryn raised his banners in rebellion to unseat the tyrant who styles himself as the Master of Westeros. This, the banners of falcons, direwolves, stags, and trouts were raised in rebellion. Together, they crowned Robert Baratheon the king of Westeros, and the war began. A war that lasted 2 years, the War of Usurper, the Targaryen loyalists would call it. Eddard preferred Robert's rebellion, or maybe he sometimes preferred that it had not taken place at all. A war that was fought for nothing in the end, it seemed. A sigh escaped him as he rode inside the walls of River Run with his sister's body in tow. The war was won, and Robert stood victorious over Rigor at the Trident. Roberta was even crowned king at the Great Sept of Baelor, but Eddard felt no happiness. He only felt loss, for his sister had passed away at the Tower of Joy. He had to sacrifice many of his friends to even gain access to his sister at the tower because a bunch of men remained stubborn. He was tired of war, tired of death. He seemed the warm halls of Winterfell, where he would bury his sister beside the remains of his father and brother. Lord Hoster and his lady wife Catelyn approached him to greet him. Eddard, I'm glad you finished your journey safe and sound. Please accept my condolences for your dearly departed sister. We held 7 days of prayers for her soul after we learned of her fate, said Lord Hoster, holding Eddard's shoulder and squeezing to comfort him. Thank you, my lord. Eddard didn't know what else to say, as he was numb to the empty platitudes he had been receiving from the many lords of the realm. My daughter has been waiting for you, Eddard, and you have ample cause to be merry, said Lord Hoster as he gave way for his daughter to approach Eddard. Eddard watched 2 servants accompany his lady wife with 2 bundles in their hands. Catelyn Tully was a beauty, there was no doubt. A beautiful bride, but one he felt he did not deserve. It was Brandon who should have married Catelyn. It was Brandon who would have become the Lord of Winterfell. Edward felt as if he was stealing his brother's position. My lord husband. Catelyn curtsied and looked at him with her blue eyes alight with happiness and pride. Her red, silken mane drifted to the silent tune of the wind. My lady, he acknowledged her with a nod and pressed a caste kiss to her rosy cheek. My lord, meet your sons, said Catelyn, taking one of the bundles from the servants and presenting the baby to his eyes. Eddard couldn't help but smile as he greeted his first child, a child with quite vivid red hair and blue eyes, who looked eerily similar to his Tully wife. He is the eldest. I thought to name him only if my lord gives me the honor, said Catelyn. Eddard nodded as it was such a simple request. Then how about Robb as his name, named after your friend, the king? Robb Stark, the heir of Winterfell. Eddard smiled and nodded. A good name, my lady. Catelyn handed young Robb to a servant while taking the second child into her hands. This time, when Eddard looked at the child, it was all Stark, with hair as black as night and eyes as gray as those of many of Eddard's ancestors. Would not think to say they are twins at first glance. Born a few seconds younger than Robb. What shall we name him, my lord? Asked Catelyn. Eddard guided his fingers through the black tuft of hair on his second son's head. Harrion. His name will be Harrion Stark. All around her she saw snow. To the east, west, south, and north she saw snow. It has been 6 years since she became the Lady of Winterfell. Despite her long stay, she remained unaccustomed to the cold winds of the north. Catelyn had known she would become the Lady of Winterfell one day. After all, her father had prepared her for this eventuality when Lord Rickard Stark agreed to the betrothal. She was supposed to marry Brandon Stark, but her betrothed was cruelly murdered by the Mad King. Catelyn was horrified when word reached River Run of the cruel end her betrothed met. She had prepared herself to be the wife of the rough Northmen. Brandon was headstrong and far more temperamental than anyone she had met. She had prepared herself to be a dutiful wife to her lord husband. Yet it was the will of the Seven that she marry the younger Stark. She married Eddard Stark after the rebels smashed the royalist army in the Battle of Bells. She had never seen the younger Stark brother before her wedding day. Eddard Stark had remained a ward of Lord Arryn the few times Brandon had visited River Run. Hence, she had never met the younger Stark brother. Even so, she married the man her father found for her like a dutiful daughter. Their marriage brought the Riverlands and the North to an alliance. With her dear sister Lysa marrying Lord Arryn, House Tully became the linchpin of their grand new alliance. It was an alliance strong enough to overthrow the yoke of Targaryen rule over Westeros. She cared not for the games of High Lords. At least she didn't care for that all too much ever since she came to Winterfell. In Riverrun, she had to act properly and be courteous every heartbeat lest she offend someone. In the North, it was the opposite. The ladies of the North were not so welcoming towards her and graced her with distant politeness. She remembered the aloofness and disinterest shining in Lady Barbray's eyes. The lords of the North, on the other hand, treated her as if she was the queen. Her husband was held in great regard by the lords of the North. The Stark name held power in the North, far beyond the Tully name could garner in the Riverlands. Perhaps this was how all the former royal houses of the old kingdoms were received. It was a change she struggled to accommodate. Ever so slowly, she was becoming far more of a child of the North than a child of the South. Before she departed from Riverrun, her uncle had warned her the people of the North were gruff in looks but hold their hearts on their sleeves. It was as her uncle said, and it was refreshing in its own way. In the North, there were no plots to usurp positions of power. The servants of the castle were not spies for rival lords. There were no rival lords to begin with. The Starks were loved and respected in the North. The only house of concern were the Boltons, owing to the actions of their ancestors. For centuries, the Boltons have remained loyal to the Starks. Even the former Red Kings have become staunch allies, as seen in the rebellion. The Vale, Riverlands, and Stormlands all had houses that rebelled against their liege lords. In the North, this was not to be. When her husband called the banners, the whole North marched under the direwolf banners. The entire North marched in one pace under one leader to cast down the tyranny of dragons. The people of the North were simple people. It is hard to earn their trust as an outsider, but once the trust is established, you become one of them. This was something she loved about the North. She may have left her family home for that of her husband, but she never felt Winterfell alien to her. Well, except for the Godswood. She could never feel welcome in the Godswood of Winterfell. She had tried to do so much to Septim Mordane's charging. Not that she held any notion of abandoning the Seven and convert to the worship of old gods. It's just that she tried to see the Seven in the weirwood trees. In Riverlands, this was the norm, as many houses hosted weirwood trees and considered them a part of their culture. They were planted close to small septs and considered to be a part of the Seven, with the faces of the Seven etched on the woods. It was a long tradition dating back to the coming of Andals. Although it was a tradition not universally followed, the Starry Sept never acknowledged such fallacies. Most Riverland houses don't consider the Starry Sept as an authority in spiritual matters, especially after Aegon the Dragon liberated her people from the cruel rule of the Ironborn. This schism in the faith had led Riverlands to develop different traditions. Catelyn touched her belly and sighed. She was carrying the fourth child of her dear husband. It was only 2 years ago she delivered her first daughter, Sansa. Her first daughter was named after a famed lady of House Stark who was set to inherit Winterfell during the conquest of Dorne. While her twin sons were born out of duty, Sansa was born from love. Her daughter was the apple of her lord husband's eye. Even at the young age of 2, her daughter managed to subjugate her husband to her will. Not a night had passed without her husband caring for Sansa before she went to sleep. Catelyn was immensely happy watching her daughter and husband sleep. Sometimes Ned would sleep with their daughter sleeping on his chest. Catelyn never imagined she would fall in love with her husband. From an early age, she had learned love was scarce in the world when her mother passed away. As the eldest, it has been her duty to care for her siblings in the absence of her mother. She considered herself blessed, for she had found love, even if she married for duty. That doesn't mean her marriage was without ups and downs. While she loved her husband dearly, her only complaint would be of the bastard's presence in Winterfell. She could understand men, especially those who go out for war, cannot be expected to remain faithful to their wives. They face death frequently on the battlefield. Her septa had taught her that men fall to wicked ways because war was never meant to be of man's nature. War should be fought for the divine, and that was the sole just war. When men fight for material gain, they shall often fall prey to sin. Catelyn could understand why her husband lay with another woman. She had learned of her husband's bastard even at Riverrun, and she had forgiven him long before he even reached her home after the war. What she could not forgive was the fact that Jon Snow was set up in Winterfell long before she even set foot in the castle. She fiercely fought for the bastard to be removed from Winterfell, but her lord husband always dismissed her concerns. Did Ned love the woman who birthed Jon Snow that much to have the bastard grow with his true-born children? This was the question that burned in her mind, not to mention the threat the bastard posed against her children. Surely Ned should know. Bastards are dangerous. Surely her lord husband knows of the Blackfyre rebellions and understands the threat posed by Jon Snow to her Robb. It seemed despite her lord husband growing up under Lord Aaron's roof, he had yet to gain the wise teachings of the Seven. Children born from sin will only thrive in sin. If her husband refused to see the danger posed by the bastard, she decided she would not let her sons remain ignorant. To that end, she decided to teach her two sons the wisdom of keeping adherence to the tenets of the Seven. It was at this point she realized the colossal mistake she made when discarding that the North held different views about bastards. It took her 5-year-old son to teach her this lesson. Catelyn had charged Septa Mordane to teach Robb and Harrion of morality. The first 2 days of their teachings remained about topics like justice, honor, chivalry, kindness, etc. On the 3rd day, Septa Mordane taught her sons about sins and the punishment the Seven dealt upon those who sin. It was there the Septa explained to her two sons about the sins of bastards. Robb dutifully listened, but Harrion, her fiercely intelligent Harrion, immediately asked a question that attacked the foundation of her faith. If someone sins, then shouldn't the fruits or punishment of that sin be held over those who sin rather than those who could not take part in the sin? That question had stumped Septa Mordane, who spluttered and quoted the 7-point star. The word of the Seven is unquestionable, dear Harry. The gods themselves have spoken their will. The response that came from her son was something neither she nor Septa Mordane expected from a 5-year-old. If your god tells you that someone has sinned just because of the circumstances of their birth, which they had no control over, then that god is evil. Those who believe such nonsense are ill in their minds, and people like them are those who commit the worst of sins, the sin of willful ignorance and blind hatred. Septa Mordane had once again tried to correct her little Harry to no effect. The Septa had even asked her to discipline her children, but she was reluctant to do so. Despite Harrion challenging her religious beliefs, Catelyn was struck by her son's reasoning. Can I truly believe a child is inherently evil? Any mother who loved her children could not bear thinking of children as a source of evil. The mere fact that she thought of her husband's bastard as a source of sin was influenced by her own hatred of her husband's unfaithfulness. It was there she understood that her anxieties regarding Jon Snow are birthed from hatred within her mind. She had tried not to hate her husband's bastard, but it was oh so difficult. It was difficult to let go of her fear towards bastards and very difficult to not worry on her behalf. Would Ned set me aside for Jon Snow's mother if he could? This was a thought that burned in her mind. Could it be that the love that blossomed between her and her husband was an illusion? Does Ned love the mother of his bastard more than her? All these worries inhibit her from seeing Jon Snow as just a child. She could not let these worries go from her mind that easily. To make matters worse, her Harrion was too close to Jon Snow for her comfort. No matter how much she tried to, she could not change Harrion's mind. She had subtlety tried to remove her children from playing with the bastard. She had tried to have the bastard take his meals from the kitchen, just like the servants, but Harrion would take his meals from the kitchen as well with his bastard brother. Catelyn tried to persuade and even physically force Harrion away from doing so, but her son would refuse to take any food. This had caused her husband to be cross with her, and she eventually allowed the bastard to take his meals with the rest of her family, although she would never allow the bastard a seat at the table. Again, this posed a problem as Harrion would not take his meals if Jon was not allowed the same privilege. Harrion would join Jon Snow and take his meals on the floor. And yeah, all these events created rifts between herself and her second son. She had even fought with Ned over the issue, but her husband would not chastise Harrion. There was one time Ned had done so, and that was on behalf of Septa Mordane, who complained Harrion rejected the teachings of gods. Lady Catelyn still remembered the fiery argument her son made that disarmed even Ned at that time. If I'm to believe in the tenets of the 7-pointed star, then I'd have to believe the vast majority of the North is filled with heathens that ought to be put to death. I also have to consider anyone born in Essos will be going to hell simply because they were born in the wrong culture. If this is the book I'm to get morality from, then I respectfully decline those teachings. I don't need my morality to be based on ramblings of fanatics and genocidal barbarians of antiquity. What turned out to be a supposed chastisement resulted in Ned ordering Septa Mordain to not teach Robb or Harrion of the Seven. Since then, Ned took the boys to the Godswood to teach them of the old gods.
My lady.
Her musings were cut short as Maester Luwin called for her attention. Master Luwin? My lady, a raven has arrived from King's Landing. From King's Landing? She asked in surprise. The capital has been silent for a long time. I'm afraid so, my lady. Where is Lord Stark? In the Godswood with the children. She answered before a worry settled in her mind. Has something untoward happened in the capital? Hey, my lady. War is coming to Westeros once more. Belon Greyjoy has declared himself king of the Iron Islands. The Lannister fleet, anchored at Lannisport, has been attacked by the Ironborn fleet. The king has called the banners. Eddard felt the gentle rustle of the leaves, the chirping of sparrows gave the Godswood normalcy that soothed his mind. It was funny to think this is how he found peace in his life. If Brandon or Lyanna was to see him like this, they would have teased him endlessly. Sadly, his brother and sister passed away. Or maybe, he thought as he looked at the face carved on the heart tree. Maybe they are watching him from beyond, he thought. He closed his eyes and leaned back against the trunk of the tree, breathing in deep from the misty northern air.
If you are watching, Leia, I kept the promise. Your son is safe by my side, and so long as I breathe, he will live.
Opening his eyes, he glanced at the three children sitting on a large branch of the heart tree. The branch was not so high, so he had no reason to fear for the children to fall down. He smiled at his sons, chatting away excitedly over the new story he told them of the old Stark kings. Sitting in the middle was Harrion, who has an uncanny attention span and an inquisitive mind when it came to knowledge. Maester Luwin had repeatedly informed him of the sheer intelligence exhibited by Harrion. From a young age, Harrion remained inquisitive of his surroundings. Growing up, his son only seems to have expanded on this trait. At first, Eddard had doubted Maester Luwin's observation about how alert young Harrion was. As Harrion grew to the age of 3, he also began to note how calm Harrion was compared to Robb or Jon. Harrion also learned to walk and talk far earlier than his other two sons, who only managed to gurgle out sounds. It was also noted by Maester Luwin how quick Harrion was to learn his letters and numbers. By the time Robb and Jon began learning the letters and numbers, Harrion was already reading books from Winterfell's library. If all of the above hadn't convinced him, the incident with Septa Mordain convinced him of how much sharp Harrion was compared to normal children. At first, Eddard had thought Harrion to have a specific problem against the faith of the Seven. It turns out he was wrong, and instead his son decided that he was not going to believe in any gods. Belief without evidence brings less clarity to the truth. Those who do not seek truth will court ignorance. Those who do not recognize their ignorance will become a disaster to themselves and those around them. These are the words Harrion said to him when he had asked the reason for his son's skepticism in gods. His son apparently decided to coin the idea that there is no god. Eddard felt that was the truth, but an inconvenient truth regardless. If there was any god, wouldn't they have stopped wars from happening in the world? Wouldn't gods would have stepped in and lent the righteous people aid? These were queries Harrion raised on different occasions to which he had no answer. Even a well-learned man like Maester Luwin has struggled before Harrion's questions. Despite Harrion's skepticism of the divine, his son found no discomfort in visiting the Godswood. Like him, Harrion preferred the peaceful air of the Godswood. He took notice Harrion had increased his visits to the Godswood recently. Eddard took that as a good sign. My love. Eddard looked up from his musings to see his lady wife approaching him with a parchment in her hand. His lady wife is a beautiful woman, and the baby bump in her belly only increased her beauty tenfold. Her beauty only grows as years go by, Eddard thought. Have you come to join us, my lady? He asked with a smile. He amusedly watched as Robb jumped down from the branch he was sitting on to jump into Catelyn's arms. Robb has always been far closer to his mother than Harrion. I'm afraid not, my love. The somber tone in his wife's tone clued him to an unsavory event. Robb, Harrion, Jon, please take your leave. After the children left the Godswood, he turned to his wife with a raised eyebrow. King Robert has called his banners, my love. The Ironborn have rebelled. His wife's words were a knife to his heart. Gods he had prayed, and hoped he would not have to fight another war in his lifetime. He could see why Harrion chose to believe there are no gods. But he could not refuse the call to arms put forth by his king. You could stay, my love. The king will be sending the fleet to combat the Ironborn. Surely the North lack a fleet, and you will be needed to defend the shores of the North. Catelyn said, hoping to keep her husband with her family. I shall serve where the king commands me to serve. Knowing Robert, he will ask for me to stay by his side. It won't do to reject a king's command, said Eddard as he led his visibly disappointed wife towards the castle. War was coming to Westeros once more, and like last time, he would fight as is his duty. He just hoped his children would not fight in wars. If peace could be achieved in the time of his children, he would fight 1,000 wars to do so. Long has it been since Harry knew of love. Ever since he found out he was an immortal, he had tried to live the life he had with Daphne and his daughters, Stephanie and Gwyneth, in full. He knew he would live to see his children and grandchildren grow old, yet he lived by their side as happy as one could be. He made the best of the time he had with his family before quietly fading away into anonymity, lest seekers of immortality and power target his family as a means to capture him. The only one with whom he confided his woes was his wife. Daphne was the one who concocted the plan and made him swear to live out the rest of his life. It was her advice that gave him the strength to plow on and live the time he was gifted. She was the one who taught him how precious life was, and as she said on her deathbed, all life has a purpose, but purpose does not appear in an instant. We create a purpose in life. After I'm gone, I want you to find another purpose. When Daphne closed her eyes, never to open them again, he followed her advice to the letter. He found a new purpose, one that ensured he would be detached from emotional attachments. His new purpose was knowledge. After making sure his daughters stood on their own legs, he began his journey around the world. It was a changed world he stepped into as the existence of the wizarding world became public knowledge. Despite some rising tensions, he began his quest to acquire more knowledge. Muggle, or magical knowledge, didn't make a difference to Harry. He studied everything worth studying, regardless of their origin. He traveled the world, learning different languages, experiencing different cultures, adopting new cuisine. Those travels even helped him cope with his existence as he observed the troubles that bothered other people. His wars were trivial in comparison. Then, the war happened. It was inevitable, in his opinion. Anyone who was intimately aware of human behavior could have predicted war was inevitable, despite stringent progress within wizarding communities across the globe. They failed to realize how destructive Muggles and their ability to wage war can be. The Muggles were not a single tribe, just as the people of the wizarding world. They were more than ready to destroy themselves, so long as their perceived enemies were destroyed. Not to mention the political leaders of Muggles were mad lunatics, believing in an all-powerful God who demanded an apocalypse to cleanse the unworthy from Earth. Seriously, one would hope people have enough sense not to worship genocidal maniacs. Nope. People were perfectly happy to trash the world so long as they were allowed in their heaven, a concept cooked up by Bronze Age barbarians. Well, if one needs to get to heaven, they've got to die first. Of course, this led to all religious nutjobs in the world to wage a holy crusade in the name of their god. What started as a war for resources later turned into a stupid genocidal war based on humanity's imaginary friend, in the sky. Growing up, Harry cared not a single whit about religion. It was only when he saw how religion became a mental sickness to vast proportions of people did he realize the dangers it held. This is why he felt a deep aversion to any of the new religions of the world he found himself in. Despite coming to care for his new family, he didn't like their beliefs, especially his mother's religion. The Faith of the Seven gave him too many vibes of another religion that employed some sick child molesting weirdos as priests. It felt like he was living in a cheap imitation of a medieval version of his Earth. It was a strange world, and in an even more strange way, he arrived here. Harry knew he was most likely walking to his death when he walked into the Vale, but never had he imagined he would be reborn as a newborn. Sure, there were theories that the Vale was a doorway to another world, but those were theories. Either way, he was reborn into this new world as a Stark of Winterfell. Harrion, they named him, and he grew alongside his twin brother and half-brother in the castle of Winterfell. It was mentally exhausting for him to bear the early years of his infancy. He retained little control over the motor functions of his body, and when he finally managed to regain a semblance of control, he was constrained by the weakness of his young body. Even his magic had suffered quite a blow, but surely he was growing more powerful each day. At the age of 3, he could barely make a stone lift a few inches from the ground. Now he could cast the hovering charm easily, all thanks to the Elder Wand, which returned to his hand on his 5th birthday. So far, the Resurrection Stone and the Cloak of Invisibility was nowhere to be seen. Despite his less than wobbly magical power, his access to Elder Wand gave him a certain advantage, an advantage he was going to use for the benefit of House Stark and the North. War has been declared in the Seven Kingdoms. The land of his new family was going to war with the Ironborn, who he was fascinated to note was a far worse version of ancient Vikings. While he had nothing against some bunch of barbarians on an island far away, he was not prepared to have his father and the people of the North suffer needlessly in this war. It was this decision that led him to the armory of Winterfell. Harry felt the familiar weight of Elder Wand settle in his right-hand palm. Rows upon rows of swords, shields, armor, and spears lined the armory. More was being made by the smiths of Winterfell and Wintertown. Taking a deep breath, he began his work in earnest. It took him a while, but he managed to cover enough tools of war with spells that ought to give Northerners an edge in the coming battles. Applying the unbreakable and repelling charms on chainmail, armors, and other weapons, he was sure there will be a far less death ray. He had already repeated this feat with his father's set of armor and shield last night. With the deed done, he quietly extracted himself from the armory. The armory of Winterfell was placed right at the center of the inner walls near the courtyard. So Harry had to walk through the courtyard to the library, where he was supposed to attend the daily lessons with Maester Luwin. On the way to the library, he slowed down his pace to watch the men train in the courtyard. With his father calling the banners of the North, Winterfell was gathering men to fight the Ironborn. More and more levies were being drawn up from the lands under Stark rule. The library tower was one of the largest structures in the castle. Winterfell, being one of the oldest castles in the Seven Kingdoms, boasted a great repertory of books in the library. It was one of Harry's favorite places in the castle, other than the underground hot springs, crypts, and Godswood. A lot of lords from the east and north side of Winterfell were also arriving one by one. Last he knew, there were quite a few clansmen of the Northern Mountain being welcomed in the Great Hall by his father. Standing at the base of the tower, he felt like the tower was too high to climb. Well, his young legs could race all the way to the top of the tower without much strain. That was not the case for Maester Luwin, who was old. Yet, the old Maester retained his stellar health while climbing the steps of this tower on a daily basis. "The old Meister has been asking for ye, little lord," said Brown Wendell, one of the guards that usually was on guard duty at the tower. "Is he cross with me, Wendell?" Harry asked. "Saw him looking all over the courtyard a moment ago. He didn't look happy to me," said Brown Wendell with a shrug. "Maybe if Lord Stark would allow me, that is. The squids have kept away from northern shores from what I've heard. Good sense, if ye ask me, 'cause we ain't like the Southerners." "Are you going to fight the Ironborn?" Harry laughed before entering the tower and began to climb the stone stairs. The tower somewhat reminded him of the towers of Hogwarts, especially the Owlery. While the ravens of Winterfell were kept in the Maester's tower, a few of them usually hung back at the top of this tower. This made him remember his trips to Hogwarts Owlery, where Hedwig would be waiting for him. As he climbed the stairs, he could hear the sound of Master Luwin teaching Robb and Jon a black battle axe on a field of silver. "Which house's banner is that, Robb?" asked Maester Luwin. "House Dustin," Robb answered hesitantly. "Wrong. Jon, what is the banner of House Dustin?" asked Maester Luwin. "A black crown between two crossed long axes on a field of yellow," answered Jon, after taking some time to think it over. It was at that time Harry stepped into the room with Maester Luwin eyeing him in a dissatisfied manner. Harry rolled his eyes as Robb looked at him with a cross look. He knew that look. His twin oftentimes was too clingy, always wanting to join him in one of his escapades. Jon, on the other hand, waved at him enthusiastically and moved a bit to the side to give him a seat between Robb and the black-haired boy. "Harrion might be able to remind us the banner of House Serwyn," said Maester Luwin with a pointed look. "A black double-headed battle axe in a silver field." Harry answered and looked at the offered seat on the small wooden bench pointedly. "You may take the seat if you can answer this question." "What are the words of House Serwyn and the name of their castle?" asked Maester Luwin. "Hond and ready are their words. House Serwyn's seat is called Castle Serwyn." Harry answered and took the seat he was offered with Maester Luwin's permission. "Where were you this time, Harry?" asked Maester Luwin, leaning over the large book he was holding. How many times have I told you to be on time for your lessons? Just here and there, he answered evasively. Many times, Maester Lewin. I shall endeavor to be on time from now on. This is what you said yesterday when I had to drag you out of the crypts. But I heard a sound that led me deep into the crypts. I swear it was the builder, Harry said with an exaggerated whisper at the name of their famed ancestor. Robb was now looking excited while Jon looked scared. It has been his bit of entertainment to tell ghost stories to Jon, who was scared of ghosts. Robb, on the other hand, was excited and wanted to see the ghosts his twin kept talking about. There are no such things as ghosts, Harry, said Maester Lewin, who eyed him with a warning look as he patted Jon on his head. Jon, your brother is only trying to scare you. There are no ghosts in the crypts of Winterfell. I know what I saw. Only those with Stark blood can see the builder. Is he strong? Did he teach you his magic? Asked Robb, all but jumping in his seat with excitement. Harry had to admit his twin had some weird ideas floating in his head, but he got to admit, the kid sure has a vivid imagination. I'm learning, but I'm just a novice compared to the builder. When I'm grown, I'll build a wall twice as big as the one we have right now, said Harry with a smirk. Yes, but one with steel this time, and it should be around Winterfell. Bad men won't be able to attack Winterfell that way, said Robb. It's from the North Gate, said Jon. Robb and Jon raced towards the window side and began to pull a chair near the window. They began to climb over the chair and onto the window to see what was happening. Harry also joined in on the fun, but he was given assistance by Maester Lewin, who gave him a lift. Harry, how many times have I told you? Maester Lewin trailed off as they all listened to a horn being blown in the distance. Harry saw his two brothers' eyes shine with excitement as they saw men marching in lines behind long lines of horses, and on the far back they could see carts being drawn by bulls. Winterfell, getting filled with banners, had turned his two brothers into excitable little hellraisers. Who are they? Asked Robb excitedly. A white sun on a field of black are their banners. Surely they must be of House Karstark, said Harry. Right you are, young Harry. It's seeing we will have to cut our lessons short, said Maester Lewin. The excited yell let out by Jon and Robb was amusing to watch for Harry, who was reminded of his two children. At the same time, his smile disappeared as he trained his eyes on the marching men. He held no notion that most of these men were going to return alive or even whole. War always took some toll, be it life, injury, or the mind itself. Harry frowned at the work being done inside the smithy. The smiths of Winterfell were busy using their hammers, chisels, and files to make tools for warfare. The tools of the blacksmiths were pounding away, and if one had the necessary allure to the profession, they could listen and recognize the music hidden within. He just hoped his enchantments would help save as many lives of the Northmen as possible. The ringing of steel as hammers pound away to shape the fine contours of the weapon being made. The chisels that help in etching engravings or even chip away slags. The files that remove the rust and keep the edge as sharp as it needs to be. These tools were indeed musical instruments. Perhaps not of the same proclivity as regular musical instruments, but certainly they were instruments of fine arts. The music they brought forth gave birth to weapons that sung the song of steel across the world. The weapons these tools made carried the song of death, and yet they also brought salvation. The original techniques were lost in time, but that wasn't going to constrain someone like Harry. He, after all, commanded the ability to summon spirits of long past. The only thing that inhibited his ability was the knowledge of those ancient souls. It was for this knowledge he traveled to these places to trace the lost arts of these ancient civilizations, and his trip was not in vain. In his travels around the world, he came to love the craft of a blacksmith. There was something primeval to that profession that called him to this ancient art. His curiosity had led him all the way to Sri Lanka and southern India, where the origins of Damascus steel lay waiting for someone with the right resources to claim. He managed to succeed in accessing several old archives, and through them, he managed to summon the relevant spirits to the world of the living. From them, he cracked several methods of constructing Damascus steel. It was no easy task, but with the aid of magic, he could ease the efforts put into the making and even improve upon the quality of the steel. The goblins were a tough bunch, as even the long-dead spirits were not willing to share their knowledge with anyone outside their race. So he went the old-fashioned way to recreate the properties of goblin steel. Trial and error was the norm. He used, and to his surprise, it worked. He had tried to access the secrets of goblin steel, or even the mythical metal mithril. Sadly, he knew not how those were constructed. The secrets of Mithril eluded Harry as any information on the old metal was lost to the ages. No records survived about that metal, and if there was such a record, they were heavily shielded under a veil of anonymity. Goblin steel, on the other hand, was available to be studied. The sword of Gryffindor was more than enough of a specimen for Harry to study. The key to constructing a strong magical sword was spell forging. He trained for 6 months to properly use spell forging techniques by casting bronze swords. Then he went to steel casting after he became familiar with casting spells to bind layers upon layers of metal within a sword. While goblins found a way to bind spells within layers with their unique style of magic, Harry had to be more innovative. He used spells to bind the layers at the moment of casting, but also included runes to maintain the spell's everlasting nature. He suspected the goblins found a way to inscribe runes into the layers inside a sword. It was an art he was sadly unfamiliar with. But he knew to use the runes over the metallic surface to preserve the aesthetics of a sword. He could keep the runic inscriptions invisible to the naked eyes. The combination of spell forging and the secrets of metallurgy behind Damascus steel led him to create an entirely new form of steel. What got his attention, however, was the new world he was born into, already housed a similar version of such steel called the Valyrian steel. The Valyrians who inhabited the Valyrian Peninsula had managed to produce this metallurgical and magical marvel. They named it Valyrian steel. Rumors claim Valyrian steel was made from dragon flames. Harry knew that to be untrue. Well, maybe the Valyrians used the flames of dragons to melt the steel and keep the temperature as high as possible. But magic was the backbone of Valyrian steel. He knew that for sure when he studied the ancestral Valyrian sword of House Stark. In Westeros and Essos, a Valyrian steel sword was priceless. A mountain of gold could be acquired by selling a Valyrian steel blade. Owning a blade was also a mark of prestige, as no more Valyrian steel blades were being made. But that was not why Harry was in the smithy of Winterfell, making his first attempt at making a sword and armor in this world. He had found out another bit of problem in his plan of charming the weapons and armors of Northmen with protective spells. His spells were not lasting more than a week. It seemed despite using the Elder Wand, his magic was not strong enough to properly use the abilities of the Death Stick. Usually, a spell cast by the Elder Wand would not easily weaken with time. Unfortunately, that's what's happening right now. Harry had found the spells he used inside on his father's armor and shield had disappeared after a week. He didn't know why, but he was curious to find out why magic was being drained. Meanwhile, he came up with a short-term solution of spell forging a new armor and shield for his father. While he was at it, he decided to spell forge 2 swords as well. Harry was not so worried by the underperformance of Elder Wand, nor was he worried about the absence of the other 2 Hallows. His research into ancient Norse rituals in Norway and Egypt made him learn of his quite accidental involvement in an old ritual. The Hollows were not gifts from death, as the tales of Beetle the Bard would have one believe. The Hollows were linchpins to an old ritual, a ritual that had Nordic origins. The 3 Hollows were powerful objects, but they were assembled by assigning them an epithet of 3 powerful ideas. The Elder Wand was tied to the idea of power, the stone tied to the idea of spirit, and lastly, the cloak tied to the concept of invisibility. The ritual succeeded in making their objects phenomenally powerful, but his studies over the ancient runes and glyphs used on the 3 Hallows led him to conclude the ritual was never completed. The Hallows changed hands over the years through different wizards, assimilating their power, character, and magic throughout the years. But, like all cups, there is a limit to which it can be filled. Fortunately or unfortunately, depending on the situation, when Harry came to possess the 3 Hallows, he unwittingly managed to fulfill the thirst of the 3 Hallows. Being an unwilling Horcrux to Voldemort also did not help, and he came to possess the Elder Wand after surviving a killing curse from Voldemort. The remnants of these 2 unnatural magical energies became a catalyst for absorbing the 3 aspects of power, spirit, and invisibility into his soul. Power made his body endure time. Invisibility gave his body a kind of invulnerability that allowed him to survive mortal wounds. For a long time, he had wondered what the aspect of spirit has given him. He had explored soul magic to its extremes, but he never came to a solid conclusion. Well, his present situation gave him an idea of what the aspect of spirit gave him. It seemed he obtained the ability to reincarnate with his identity intact. In a way, the concept of spirit is synonymous with the identity of a person. He came to this conclusion based on the simple fact that he remembered everything that pertains to his identity as Harry Potter. The Elder Wand was indeed as powerful as it could be. The only problem was that the world he lived in seems to suck out any shred of magic unless it was tethered by runic inscriptions. He had noted runic magic to function adequately, as Valyrian steel blades have not suffered any drain of magic. Harry looked at the melting pot sitting inside the raging magical fire he had created. The blacksmiths were looking at him as if he was a god. The Northerners were pagan worshippers, even if they don't identify themselves as such. At least he considered them pagans. Anyone who worshipped the forces of nature without devolving into organized religion was pagan in his eyes. The old gods of the forest sounded more and more like a disorganized pagan religion, which only asked two things from their followers: say no incest and slavery. Both of those ideas he could easily get behind. He also loved the fact that the Northerners worship trees and sees them as the divine embodiment of gods. He couldn't find a better way to instill nature preservation in a bunch of muggles. Harry noted the crucible steel ingots he prepared had turned into a fluid state inside the melting pot. Without his spells, it would have been nigh impossible to use this method and cast steel swords or armor. Pour it into the mold, Master Wegner. The local smith nodded and took the mold out of the fire. Harry provided and poured it into the mold. Harry would have done the deed, but his arms were not strong enough to bear the weight, nor were they steady enough. As Master Wegner poured the molten metal into the mold, Harry began chanting in Latin. He began casting a long chain of spells that would shape, bound, and link the layers of metal with magic. As Master Wegner finished pouring the last drop into the mold, Harry finished his chants. Then a helper of Master Greg took the clay mold and placed it in a bucket of water. The water hissed as it rushed into the metal and began to quench it. Harry immediately cast a spell that removed the clay mold from the sword and began carving out runes all over the blade's periphery with his wand. The runes have to be drawn before the blade loses its heat, so he supplemented the runes with heat, preserving charms. When all was said and done, the sword was complete, and with a small swish of his wand, he made the runes flare up with magic before disappearing altogether. Then he removed the heat-preserving charms and allowed the blade to cool down. Harry looked over the sharpness of the blade and the distinct ripples over the surface. It looked exactly like Valyrian steel, and now he could focus on other works. Harry looked around and saw his twin and John looking wide-eyed at the sword he produced. The other blacksmiths were not faring any better. "So there really is a ghost of the builder in the crypts," whispered John, turning pale white. Harry barely suppressed his laughter. Oh, it was one of his best ideas to claim he was interacting with the ghost of Brandon the Builder. Now he has got a plausible explanation for all of his miracle works and magic. Let's start again, Master Wegner, this time with more steel. After all, a single sword alone would not do the trick. Och rakes x x x x x x x.
Ned, I'm concerned about Harry.
Surely you see his obsession with the Smiths and his far-fetched claims are not healthy, complained Catelyn.
Eddard frowned, but otherwise remained unreceptive of his wife's concerns. It was not that he didn't understand Catelyn's concerns regarding their son. It was just that he didn't find much trouble with Harrion's interests. He remembered a time when all he could think of was swords and horses. He had also been fascinated with how swords were made, and he had itched to use on in his youth. Eddard vividly remembered the first time he held a weird in his hand. It was no wooden sword, but a castle-forged sword. Brandon was the one who helped him get access to the sword. He was so grateful to his brother for doing that. His father, on the other hand, was not so pleased to learn about the incident. If he was to pretend to be cross with Harrion, he'd be a hypocrite. It seemed his son inherited a lot more than just his looks. As for Harrion's claims of ghosts and whatnot, he was somewhat concerned. The crypts of Winterfell is a dark place, especially if one goes deep enough. Even Eddard dared not travel too far into the depths of the crypts. In part, this was because of Lyanna's attempts at scaring him in his childhood. Though elder to his sister, he remained vulnerable to her mastery of scaring people to their death. Harrion is a child cat. It is only normal for young children to find swords, horses, and soldiers fascinating. It is only natural for him to be scared of the crypts. Remember what Maester Lewin said, a child's mind is creative and comes up with most silly explanations to those which they do not understand. But Ned, Harry claims he saw a ghost, not just any ghost, but the ghost of your famed ancestor. Catelyn argued most fiercely. Eddard loved it when his wife became all flustered and angry. A fish in hot water, his wife was, when she became all angry and protective. Not to mention her cheeks would turn red, synonymous to her fiery hair. That is most likely because of old stories he loves so much to read. Harry has been learning even the old tongue to read some of the old scrolls in the library. Nettie claims the ghosts talk to him and teaches him things. Are you not concerned? Catelyn asked with her nostrils flaring. Now he became concerned, not because Harry made up some story to scare Robb and Jon, but because of his wife's rising ire. Even he knew he should not let her fall too hard into anger as she was pregnant with their fourth child. So he petted her hair and tried to calm her down. I'll talk to him, Cat. You worry too much, my love. Eddard whispered into her hair as he pressed a chaste kiss on her head. Thankfully, that drained the anger out of his wife. Now he understood why his father always said his mother was beyond his understanding. Women were difficult to deal with. Sometimes later, he sat in the Great Hall entertaining the guests he held under his roof. Much of the North was still mustering up the troops. The Northern Army won't be sailing from the shores of the North. For one, there was not much of Navy to speak of to accomplish such an undertaking. Eddard hoped to raise 20,000 men, or at least close to that number. Then he'd march that army south and help Riverlands in throwing the Ironborn to the seas. From there, he and his men could board the ships of the Royal Fleet, and eventually attack the Iron Islands. There were quite a number of northern ships in the Sunset Sea, but they'd be tasked to protect the shores of the north. Looking at the Great Hall, he took note of Karstark, Bolton, Manderley, Lake, Tallhart, and Glovermen. There were other notable houses like Forrester, Whitehill, Locke, and many more. The lords were all gathering in Winterfell for their long march to Riverlands. At the moment, many houses have yet to arrive, like Umbers and Mormonts. Strangely enough, Lord Orbert Stain of Skagos decided to answer the call. The man and the rest of Skagos he had arrived together with the Karstarks. Lord Orbert even gifted him unicorn horn, which was a rare item in itself. After Aegon's conquest, the Skagosi have never answered the call of Starks of Winterfell unless it was to defend the north against wildlings. It was for this reason the Starks before him never bothered the Skagosi. Then again, the oaths houses Stain, Crowell, and Magner swore was to raise their banners in support to defend the wall or to protect the north from southern invaders. Lord Manderley seems to be in a good mood, said Lord Rickard Karstark, as the Lord of Karhold approached him. The Karstarks were Starks in all but name. Lord Rickard had more similarity to him than anyone else in the hall. For a stranger, Lord Rickard would look like an older brother or an uncle to him. Aye, Lord Karstark, a raven from Kong's Landing arrived, informing the Ironborn has attacked Shield Islands. Anything that sets back the Reach is a cause of celebration for Lord Wyman. Eddard said with a somewhat amused smile. Ha ha! The man always says the story of Manderley's arrival to the north, to his guests. I'd wager he is obsessed with the Starks, said Lord Rickard, shaking with laughter. Don't forget, you are a Stark as well, my lord. I'm a Karstark. Is there that much difference? Asked Eddard. I suppose when you put it like that, my lord Stark. I noticed you named your second son Harrion. My eldest son is also named Harrion. I named him after the builder's son, said Eddard. You Starks have a penchant for naming your children after men of the past. Lord Rickard just grumbled good-naturedly, a trait that is common among Karstarks as well. Eddard reminded his kin. The doors to the hall opened, snatching Eddard's attention. It was the local blacksmith who was accompanied by Robb, Harrion, and Jon. Some of the Stark men were even pulling in a small wooden cart with its top covered with a cloth. What is this, Master Wegner? Eddard asked with a frown as he did not remember asking the man's presence. Least of all in the Great Hall in the presence of other lords. Apologies for the intrusion, my lord, but this could not wait. A most extraordinary event has occurred, my lord. Your son managed to forge Valyrian steel, Eddard's mouth hung open and the whole hall became silent for a moment. Eddard stared at the blacksmith confusedly, wondering if the man lost his mind. He was not the only one who was thinking along those lines. "What kind of foolishness are you talking about? You fool! You dare to lie in the presence of a Stark at the heart of the North," thundered Lord Rickard. But, my Lord Corstark, I'm not lying. Look for yourself." The blacksmith then removed the cloth from the cart to show a shiny new set of armor, greaves, and a helmet. It was a full plate armor, painted pitch black in color, but that was not the detail that took the collective breath out of the whole. What surprised many was the shining rippling pattern that surrounded the armor. The paint may have covered the whole armor, but the distinct ripple pattern was there. If one looked close enough... "If you still don't believe me, look at this," said Master Wegner, after which the blacksmith picked up a sheathed sword from the cart. With a flourish, the blacksmith drew the sword, and the steel singing was all too familiar for Eddard, who was intimately familiar with ice. "Oh gods, give me strength," Eddard heard Lord Rickard say with utter surprise. He was not far away from saying something along the lines, but he tried to keep a smooth face. Instead of saying anything, he turned to his three sons, who were sporting different expressions on their faces. Robb was positively thrumming with glee. Jon looked happy, and yet a bit more concerned at all the attention they were garnering. Harrion, on the other hand, looked at him with an innocent smile. "Told you Harry could speak with the ghost of Bran the Builder." "Everybody made fun of me then. What say you now, huh?" Eddard palmed his face at his eldest son's outburst. It did not help at all, and the inhabitants of the hall began excitedly whispering with each other. He could make out whispers like Stark blood being strong, wolf blood blessed by the old gods. What have you done now, Harry? Or maybe could his son truly speak with Bran the Builder? Eddard wondered. Looking at the Valyrian steel blade, which was now in Lord Rickard's hand, he could believe his son's claim. Or maybe could it be that his son is the second coming of the Builder? Eddard eyed his son as if seeing Harrion for the first time. The Northern Army had marched off to Riverlands to relieve them of the Reaving Ironborn. Last Harry heard from Maester Luwin, the Northern Army was near Moat Cailin. The army would then cross into Riverlands through the perilous path of the Neck. Then they would march for Seagard and relieve House Mallister, along with the entire western Riverlands from the Ironborn invasion. At least that was the general plan. In war, plans may not necessarily survive in contact with the enemy. Harry has personal experience to attest that. You'd think having magic gives you an advantage over the Muggles. The Muggles of his world proved that magic, while certainly a powerful tool, was not all-powerful, and it had its weaknesses. The Muggles were masters in biowarfare, and they used their subtle weapons to unleash terrible diseases and viruses to cripple the wizarding army. At one point, the Muggles even managed to cripple magic as well. There was a time when Harry would have scoffed if anyone told him Muggles have the ability to cripple magic in the world. The Muggles of his world proved him wrong, and the Muggles of this world once again repeated that feat. He had thought they could not have advanced that far enough to cripple the magic of the entire world. Well, he was not sure magic was crippled all over the world, but it was crippled in Winterfell. The only smudge of magic he could feel in Winterfell was from the crypts, the hot springs underneath the castle, and the weirwood trees of the Godswood. When Harry realized he could not bind magic outside his body indefinitely, he started searching for the cause. Something was draining magic from Winterfell, and perhaps even the North or Westeros, for that matter. His failure to enchant weapons and armament of Winterfell's armory certainly led him to this conclusion. Thus, he began his search, and he was no closer to find the reason. The first place he looked for was inside Winterfell. Winterfell is the ancestral seat of House Stark and was the capital of the North before Aegon's conquest. According to Maester Luwin, Winterfell is among one of the oldest castles in Westeros and one of the largest, while legends claim the castle was built by Brandon the Builder with the aid of giants 8,000 years ago. Maester Luwin dismissed such claims. Harry agreed with the Maester. Winterfell was burned down twice before. Endals invaded Westeros by the Red Kings of Dreadfort. So, the claim of Winterfell being 8,000 years old falls flat. The outer walls stand 80 feet high, while the inner gate stands 100 feet high. If legends are to be believed, these two walls were built by giants. An obvious lie that could be easily dismissed. The oldest structure in Winterfell was the first keep, and that has been rebuilt before the Andal invasions, so the claim of the walls being built by giants is just superficial claims. Now, there was indeed a portion of the first keep that remained unblemished by time, and that was the crypts. The ancient crypts remained untouched by the happenings of the outside world. Well, not entirely untouched, as there were portions of the crypts that were decaying or are under the process of deterioration. However, for Harry's keen senses, he could feel the ancient magic woven around the crypts and its 2x2 pillars along its length. It was one of the reasons why he spent so much time in the crypts. From his limited probing, he learned there was an ever-expanding charm woven into the structure of the crypts. However, it was not a charm simply woven into the bricks by some wizard. The charm was somehow a self-charging runic work that seems to charge occasionally by absorbing magic from the gods' wood. And try as he might, Harry could not find any runic inscriptions inside the crypts. He was still looking, but his search has so far turned up with no success. He also theorized there is a preservation charm woven into the structure. For whatever reason, that piece of magic is not functioning everywhere. Perhaps the runic inscriptions were shoddily done, or a portion of the inscriptions are damaged. Whatever the case, he couldn't confirm his suspicions because he had yet to find the runic scripts. As if that was not enough, the fabled hot springs of Winterfell was another magical marvel. Magic was positively thrumming in the hot springs. His senses would go haywire whenever he could sneak into the hot springs. It was a perilous journey to reach the very bottom of the first keep. The hot springs lie far beneath the first keep, immersed in total darkness. This was also another place that made no sense if there was no magic involved. For all the talk of hot springs, none in the castle had seen the fabled hot springs with their own eyes. That's mostly because of a common misconception. It is believed that the Great Keep is built around the natural hot springs. Nothing could be farther from the truth. If this was indeed the case, then there was no need for servants to make warm water for baths. They could have just taken the warm water from the hot springs. The reason the servants could not do that was that the hot springs were not at all beneath the Great Keep. The hot springs lie beneath the first keep, and to access it one needs to evade some of the wreckage and find the ironwood door, far down the dungeons of the old structure. Harry found it only by using the Point Me spell. While the hot springs was indeed a natural one, there was no way it was keeping the whole castle warm by its sheer existence alone. No, magic was once again involved. The water from the hot springs flows over to the pipes that are spread out across the castle. Water cannot simply flow through the pipes without something priming the movement. Natural flow has its limits, and what he saw at Winterfell cannot be possible with the natural flow of water. So something was forcing the water from the hot springs and circulating it through the different buildings within the castle walls. The obvious culprit was magic, as he was sure the first men were not tech-savvy to invent a rotary pump when they were not even aware of steel. Now, the third and last place of magical consecration was in the Godswood. He had some experience in dealing with magical trees in the Amazon forest, and that experience warned him to bid his time. He didn't want to poke at the heart tree without certain precautions. So this left him with two options. He could investigate either the hot springs underneath the first keep, or he could look into the crypt. The hot springs would need to be examined by physically slipping into the water. With his present physical age, that was suicide, even with magic. It'd only take a small mistake for him to slip into a watery grave. So exploring the crypts became the safer option. If only it was so bloody simple, he thought as he stepped around another cluster of broken stones. The deeper one goes into the crypt, damages could be seen at a progressive rate, yet he could not find the runic scripts anywhere. The Point Me spell and all known scanning spells in his repertory were ineffective in this endeavor. For some reason, even his natural sensing skills, which he had honed over the years, were failing him. Harry! It was Maester Luwin seeking him out once again. Letting out a disappointed sigh, he looked around the stone faces of the Winter Kings of old. All of them were holding on to rusted swords while sitting on a throne. Only very few Starks had sculptures who were not kings or lords of Winterfell that remained in the crypts. Their towering statues seemed to mock his inability to find their secrets. But Harry was not going to give up that easily. There was still one more method left to try out in his arsenal. Harrion, you have archery lessons to attend. If I have to come down, I'm going to ask Lady Stark to confine you to your room for a week. Harry stopped at that threat and decided to cut his search short. It seemed he'd have to find alternative ways to find the runic scripts. I'm coming, he shouted back, lest Maester Luwin decides to step in. Picking up the oil lamp, he made his way out of the dark halls of his ancestors. His footsteps echoed throughout the otherwise silent chamber as he made his way out. It took him some time, but he finally managed to arrive near the spiraling stone stair and began his climb. He was far below and searching in the older sections of the crypts, which means he had quite a number of steps to climb. At the very top, he found Maester Luwin with an oil lamp of his own, looking none too pleased. How many times have I told you not to wander into the crypts? Maester Luwin asked him once he managed to climb out of the stairs. The builder called me and I can't say no to the builder, 'cause he is the builder, Harry squeaked out with wide eyes. If someone ever doubted his acting skills, this particular piece would have shut them up. It turns out the trick to act like a child is to make as much trouble as possible and give the most ridiculous reasons for said trouble. He also took it as a credit when he saw Maester Luwin refuse to correct him on his ghost claims. Unlike the last few times, his ability to spellforge swords has put doubt into the mind of Maester Luwin. Eyeing the Valyrian steel link on Maester Luwin's neck, he was not so surprised by the Maester's easy acceptance of his usage of magic. Harry was pleasantly surprised to know, while the Citadel disapproved of magic and its studies, they still hold a long tradition of exploring higher mysteries. That doesn't mean the Maester was wholly supportive of his magic, nor does it mean the man had anything to contribute to his specific craft. Despite Maester Luwin's studies in regards to higher mysteries, it remained theoretical studies. The Maesters of Citadel believes magic died with the death of the last of Targaryen dragons. Harry found this view interesting. He knew for fact magic was not dead as he could feel it in the air around him. Nonetheless, magic was in serious peril. It was diminished in some sense due to reasons unknown, yet pockets of magic remained. He was curious how the dragons supposedly fit into everything. But that could wait, 'cause first he had to grow up to a suitable age and then journey out of Winterfell to have his answers. Harry noticed the strange and sometimes worshipping eyes of the castle's inhabitants following him. His apparent ability to cast Valyrian steel sword had elevated him to something of an elite among the elite status. According to Septim Ordain, he was supposedly blessed by the smith. The Old Gods' followers believe he was blessed by the Old Gods of the forest with magic. Some believe his story wholeheartedly that he was communicating with Brandon the Builder. Another group believed he is the reincarnation of the Builder. Harry had openly laughed at Septim Ordain's face when she had made the ridiculous claim of his magic being a gift of the smith. So you are saying I am blessed by your imaginary god, which I don't believe in. This god of yours sure seems to be out of touch with reality for blessing heretics with powers. That was his response to the Septa's ridiculous claims. But he had to give it to the woman. She was one stubborn woman who took his retort without rising to the bait. Instead, the Septa muttered a hasty goodbye to his mother and himself before retreating to Winterfell's Septa. Since then, he heard no tales of the Septa's whereabouts, which he found very pleasant. Now, the old gods are another matter entirely. Since he credited his ability to spellforge on the ghost of Brandon the Builder, he had to keep his silence on the claims of old gods' followers. The claim was also politically safe, considering he was living at the heart of First Men culture. Despite his recent rise in popularity and literally being worshipped by the people of Winterfell, there were some who didn't give a damn. One such person was Sellas Poole. The man was thin like a chopstick and shorter than most men, with sandy brown hair and black eyes. While a distant cousin of Vion Poole, Sellas was their archery and horse riding trainer. Harry eyed his brothers, who were practicing with a bow. Owing to their young body, they were only required to learn the basics of archery, which was boring as hell. "Look who decided to turn up! Thought you could escape training again, didn't ya?" growled Sellas, before dragging Harry by his hand towards the archery range. "I wasn't trying to escape." Harry growled back as he rubbed his arm while Sellas picked up a practice bow. "You weren't? Then you wouldn't mind to show me the pose we practiced yesterday, wouldn't ya?" challenged Sellas, looking expectantly at Harry with his black, beady eyes. Harry took the bow into his hand and tried to remember the exact pose. He kept his right foot behind his left foot while raising the bow with his left hand. With his right hand, he drew the string back and looked quizzically at Sellas. "Give a bend to those knees and keep them at least shoulder width apart." Harry followed the instructions and allowed himself to move into the position. "Good," Sellas muttered while circling Harry, looking for any more defects. Keep the drawn portion of the string just underneath your jaw or keep it close to your nose. Harry stole a glance at his brothers, and they were now out of their stances, relaxing their arms. A slap to the back of his head broke him away from observing his brothers. Eyes from Harrion. An archer does not know anything else but his target. Solos growled. With a scowl, he focused on the boring task of holding a bow properly. It was going to be a long day. It was a strange journey from Winterfell to the Neck. The last time Eddard had led the Northern Army was to save Lyanna and seek justice for his brother and father. He was inexperienced then, and he had struggled to control the Lords of the North. They were a rowdy bunch, and it took all his patience to have them follow his orders. This time around, he found them far more malleable under his command. You are more at ease now, my lord. Command suits you. Eddard glanced at his fellow lord and friend, Howland Reed. Originally, the Lord of Greywater Watch was his sister's friend. He still remembered the tale Howland told him before they embarked on their journey to Dorne. Howland had felt guilty that it was because of him. Lyanna came under Rhaegar's line of sight. Only I know how alienable it feels to be the Lord of Winterfell when it should have been Brandon. I was supposed to inherit Moat Cailin by my father's schemes. It was his wish to restore the castle to its former glory, said Eddard, shaking his head ever so slightly to shake away memories that forced old wounds to reopen. That might be the case, Howland agreed curtly. But you are doing well. The Lords of the North respect you. Eddard let out a grim chuckle, not all of them. Lady Barbary surely holds a grudge. She sent as less number of men as possible. No one in a position of power will be loved by everyone. My lord, your Lord Father was respected by the Lords of the North. That doesn't mean everyone loved him. There were quite a few who disagreed with many of his decisions, and perhaps even disliked him for it. Yet, when a grave injustice was visited upon Lord Rickard, the whole North rose to avenge him. Edward nodded thoughtfully before patting the Lord of Greywater Watch on his shoulder. You are right, Howland. We find our true friends on the battlefield. I certainly did. If you consider me a friend, then I should be by your side, said Howland, making Eddard sigh. In truth, Eddard would have loved to have Howland by his side. The last time he survived the war was because of Howland. If Howland was not present at the tower, then he would have most likely perished at the end of Arthur Dayne's sword. Even now, thinking about Arthur Dayne caused him equal amounts of misery and hatred. The man had kept Lyanna locked up in the tower just because some rapist prince ordered him so. The man also had the guts to prohibit him to see his sister. At that moment, it felt right to slay all the 3 Kingsguard. On the other hand, he knew the 3 knights were just doing their duty. They swore vows before the gods to serve their king. They served the Targaryens to their last breath, and for that, they have his respect. Arthur Dayne was the most skilled swordsman he ever crossed blades with, and if it wasn't for Howland stabbing the Sword of the Morning from the back, he wouldn't be alive. No matter how dishonorable the act was, Howland saved him and brought him a few moments with his sister before she passed away. For that alone, Howland deserved his humble gratitude. The man had given him a chance to say goodbye and console his sister before she passed away. It was a debt that he could never repay. I'd rather you stay here in your home and watch your children grow. Howland, war is a grim affair, and I know your son is ill. Greywater fever, was it? A most common fever in the Neck. He will survive, my lord, said Howland. I will pray to the gods, old and new, for his recovery. But your son needs his father more than anything else. Go and be with your family. The gods know that's what I prefer instead of this war. Eddard muttered, looking at the long lines of caravans tumbling along the King's Road escorted by loyal men of the North. Speaking of your family, how fares young Robb, Harrion, and Jon? Asked Howland curiously. A smile came to Eddard's face at the thought of his children. They are doing well. Robb is the most excitable one. Harrion could give lessons to Lyanna on how to make trouble, and Jon tends to be the responsible one. That's strange. I'd have expected Jon to be the troublemaker, commented Howland, and together they shared a laugh in the memory of Lyanna. For a moment, they stayed silent, reminiscing of the past, forgetting the troubles of the present. While Greywater Watch is far away from Winterfell, we have heard rumors of Harrion's feat. Is it true that he forged Valyrian steel swords and a full suit of armor? Asked Howland. Eddard frowned as he didn't know what to feel about the whole mystery surrounding his second son. He didn't know whether to believe Harrion's claim of being taught by the ghost of Brandon the Builder to forge Valyrian steel of all things. Despite his misgivings, he felt the gods have blessed his son with a great gift, but a dangerous one. Many would kill to own a Valyrian sword, so it stands to reason that his son, who is now shown to have the knowledge to forge Valyrian steel, would be coveted by dangerous people once word of his accomplishment spreads. It was one of the reasons why he had increased Winterfell's guards before he left his home. The rumors are true, Eddard admitted, with some reluctance. I don't know exactly how, but Harrion can forge Valyrian steel. He claims he learned the art from the ghost of Brandon the Builder, which doesn't make any sense. That's very intriguing, said Howland before looking incredulously at Eddard. The ghost of Brandon the Builder taught him. I know, it doesn't make any sense, but that's what Harrion claims. I see, Howland mumbled, while looking thoughtful. What are you thinking? Eddard asked, seeing the ponderous look on Howland's face. Have you considered Harrion might be a greenseer? Asked Howland. A greenseer? Surely, you just my lord. Don't be so easily dismissive, Lord Stark, Howland warned. You do have the blood of War King running through your veins. How do you think your ancestors defeated the Marsh King? I know not, my lord. Talks of magic and myths are not my strong suits. Eddard admitted, if anything, he'd have to ask Benjen, who was far more informed in the myths and magic. For reasons beyond my understanding, my son has a unique gift. I just hope that gift serves him well and bring good fortune. If your son's gift involves forging Valyrian steel, then I think he will bring great fortune. I suspect offers will flow in from 4 corners of the world once his gifts are known, claimed Howland. Speaking of which, are you going to show me your son's work? I gave the Valyrian steel sword Harrion gave me to Sarah Roderick. The other one Harrion gifted it to Jory Castle and charged him to protect me with the sword. As for the suit of armor, I have that in my tent, said Ed. Then let's go to your tent, my lord. I'd have an eyeful of the craft of the second builder in House Stark. Satin Mudd's arms shook as he gripped the sword fastened to his waist. He prayed to the gods, old and new, to protect him this day, so that he may return to the warm embrace of his wife. His wife was expecting, and she may give birth any day now. Instead of being there for her, he was at the forefront of the war. Satin cursed the Ironborn for starting this whole mess. If it wasn't for them, he'd be in his modest holdfast instead of hiding amongst the trees on this sunny day. He'd have been most likely collecting taxes from the villages for Lord Mallister. Since the burning of the Lannister fleet, Seagard has been preparing for an Ironborn attack. Lord Mallister had readied his meager fleet and had brought the coasts as much time to properly face the Ironborn threat head-on. The Mallister fleet now lay broken beneath the waves, but those brave men certainly brought the Riverlands time to raise enough men to defend their lands. They were still recovering from the fires of the rebellion. Even so, there were brave men ready to take up arms just as the generation before had done so. Satin's own father had fought in the rebellion only to lose his life at the Trident. He had been forbidden to join his father as he had yet to earn his knighthood. 6 years later, this was no longer the case. Satin served Lord Jason Mallister most dutifully, just as his ancestors have done in the past. His vaunted ancestor was just a common soldier from the north. Just a mere mounted soldier sworn to House Dustin, who was blessed by the gods, old and new. Barrow was the name of his ancestor. Satin's ancestor was part of the Northern Army that crossed into the Riverlands under Cregan Stark for the Black Queen during the Dance of Dragons. In a twist of fate, his ancestor saved the life of Desmond Mallister's second son in a battle. For this, his ancestor was given a knighthood, a plot of land, and Lord Desmond's natural-born daughter as wife. This was how House Mudd was born, and since then, the Knights of House Mudd had served the Lords of Seagard in protecting the coasts from Ironborn reavers, bandits, and other miscreants looking to break the peace. Since Satin, longships are approaching. A scout precipitously called out to their company. There were 50 men under his command, and a better part of them was quite tired from riding along the coasts in rotating patrols. Ever since the war began, they have been riding all across the land to keep peace and evacuating the villages nearby to the coasts. It has been tiresome work, but Satin was proud to say he worked with good men. They had carried out Lord Jason's command and probably saved the lives of many innocent small folk. The Riverlands could ill afford to lose more hard-working small folk, lest there would be hardly any hands to work the fields. Oftentimes, it is the innocent that suffers in the war, and far too many had fallen when they deposed the Mad Dragon and his rapist heir from the Iron Throne. "Are there any small folk living near the shores?" he asked the scout. "No, sir." "Are you sure, lad?" "The small folk can be stubborn, and may have refused to move from their homes. These Ironborn won't be as considerate as our men. They will rape the woman and spirit them off to their barren rocks to serve as glorified slaves." "No, sir. I'm sure we had all the people moved to safer locations." Sat nodded at the scout. Now that he knew for sure there were no innocents in his way, he could spring the trap on those reaving lunatics without worry. "You hear that, men? It looks like we will be wetting the sands of our coasts with Ironborn blood. Let's go kill those rapist thugs." That was more than enough words to rile up the Emin to a frenzy. No one here was ignorant of the Ironborn and their reputation. Failure meant the desolation of their homeland, and most of the men Saturn was leading had families to protect. They could ill afford to let these Ironborn establish a foothold in these lands. Saturn led the men towards the beach, still under the cover of trees. In the distance, they could make out the Ironborn longships, as well as the small rafts carrying readers abound for the shores. "I count 4 long ships in the distance." "Sure," said the scout. "Aye. If we wait too long, more Ironborn will take positions," he mused, looking at the disembarking enemy. Saturn led his men out from the trees. He only had 8 mounted men, including himself. The rest were all peasant soldiers, and among them only 10 archers. Most of the men were in Seagard fending off the attack from Greyjoys. "Gotta work with what I have rather than what I'd prefer," he thought grimly. He rode at the front, leading the men. He had the archers stay back and pin down the Ironborn with arrows from higher ground. It also meant he'd have the advantage in the initial bout. And he was proven right when his men cut through the disorganized enemy who was running around trying to avoid arrows. Saturn took the life of an Ironborn, cleaving the head off with his sword. It was his first kill in this war, and soon he was in the thick of the battle. An axe-wielding maniac tried to bring him down from his horse, but he smashed that fool's head with the flat of his sword. It was completely unintentional, as he was aiming to cut the man's neck. Saturn's mistake notwithstanding, the Ironborn remained disoriented, and his horse, it seemed, didn't like the Ironborn one bit. His horse surged ahead and kicked the Ironborn with his hind legs. The distant crack of bones and the scream the Ironborn let out made him aware that his horse had done his work for him. "Good boy. Now let's kill the rest of them," he whispered to his horse, and so continued the carnage. Despite being a small battle, Saturn took in the smell of blood, piss and shit. Men were screaming in pain or in fear. Some were screaming for no reason at all, and was just hacking away at long-dead enemies in a frenzy. Despite the lack of quality of his men, Saturn stood victorious on the beach. When the last Ironborn died, he let out a victorious cry that was taken up by his men. At that moment, he felt like he could fight 100 battles and win all of them. Despite the euphoria that was filling his body, he took note that the longships were lowering more rafts filled to the brim with more Ironborn. "We need more archers." "Archers!" he called out, and to his surprise, 2 horns blew from the east as if answering his call. The tree lines rumbled, and from them emerged a large army. Men poured in from the tree lines, carrying the direwolf banner. Rows and rows of horses, archers, and simple soldiers poured out in droves. Leading them was a black armored figure on a black steed that seemed to suck out the very light itself. A large number of archers poured into the beach and began raining death on the Ironborn. Saturn noted that very few rafts survived the Northmen's assault. Those that survived had the good sense to turn around and take their leave. Those that tried to brave the arrows were now probably with their drowned god. The black armored figure removed his helmet, and Saturn immediately knew this was the Quiet Wolf. He had only met the Lord of Winterfell once, and that was when Lady Catelyn wed the Northern Lord at River Run. He wouldn't forget the face of Eddard Stark, as it was also the last day he spoke to his father. The Lord of Winterfell hadn't changed much in the years since the wedding. The man still sported a thick beard, and he felt a primal fear by looking into those judging gray eyes. It felt like he was being studied, and the feeling did not sit well with him. "Lord Stark, I'm Sir Satin Mudd, a knight sworn to Lord Jason Mallister." Well met, sir. Any word from Seagard? Asked the Lord of Winterfell. The voice in contrast to the looks of the Northern Lord was far softer. Perhaps that's why men call the man the Quiet Wolf. The last I had word, Lord Mallister was pinned down in his castle with repeated attacks from the Greyjoy fleet, he reported. Far be it from him to show disrespect to a Lord Paramount, especially when said Lord commanded a large army. In that case, we would help Lord Jason. Will you join us, sir? Satin perked up at the offer. He thought the Northerners would just leave them here. I would be happy to accompany you, my lord, but the Ironborn... I will leave some of my men to guard the shores. We would appreciate someone more knowledgeable of the shoreline. It ease my men to traverse these lands. Of course, my lord. I'd be happy to help. With his admittance into the Northmen's army, he was a bit happy. He knew the real fight was not going to be on some unknown beach. The real fight was going to be where the High Lords of Westeros would gather. And that's where Satin preferred to be, so that he may earn favors for his family. It also helped to be in the company of a large army. The chances for him to return to his wife was looking up for the moment. As Lord Stark began barking out orders to his troops, Satin noted a peculiar detail. The black armor the Lord of Winterfell was wearing looked so smooth and shiny, he felt self-conscious wearing his less-than-stellar armor, but it was to be expected, he supposed. He was just a no-name knight in a backwater place, while Lord Stark ruled an entire kingdom and was the lord of one of the largest castles in Westeros. There was bound to be differences in the quality of steel between them. Even so, he didn't feel like it was the trick of the light, but he was sure he took note of the rippling pattern etched on the armor plate. Shaking away such thoughts, he instead began concentrating on gathering his own men and having the wounded treated by some of the healers. The Northerners brought Jason Mallister felt the weight of the last few days on his bones. He was so tired and felt like he would keel over any moment. For days and nights, he had toiled without rest to keep Seagard out of the hands of those barbarians from the Iron Islands. At long last, after weeks of resisting the Ironborn attacks, he had managed to finally expel the Ironborn with the aid of his brave men. A great toll has been extracted from him in this war. He lost many of his family. He lost uncles and nephews in this war, but it was a price worth paying, as he had managed to keep the Ironborn from gaining a steady footing. If they had done so, he shuddered to think what would have happened. There was no Aegon the Conqueror to teach these filth there. The dragons have all died when Robert Baratheon caved in the last dragon's chest at the Trident. The Lannister fleet burning at Lannisport was the first sign of the kingdom's unraveling at the seams. If Robert Baratheon fails to crush this rebellion, he was sure the Targaryen loyalists will become a problem. Dorne was also going to intervene as they are hungry to shed the blood of those who took part in the butchering of their princess. This was one of the reasons why Lord Tully has pulled some of the lords to concentrate on gathering at Harrenhal. There was a strong chance the Targaryen loyalists might rebel in the absence of King Robert and the royal fleet. If that was the case, it was better to be prepared, as southern Riverlands would be the first to act. Similarly, the Gulltown fleet has been charged to guard the narrow seas. Jason could see an uncomfortable tension gripping Westeros. It looks like the kingdoms were once again looking into the abyss of war and destruction. If King Robert failed to crush this rebellion, his tenuous hold on the throne might weaken, and that was a situation Jason was not looking forward to. Hence, receiving this particular guest had to be done despite his personal tragedies or exhaustion. Announcing Lord Eddard Stark, the Warden of the North and Lord of Winterfell. The herald proclaimed, and in came the Lord of Winterfell. Striding in with a powerful presence, gone was the young boy who was new to the position of lordship 6 years past. In his stead there was a true Stark of Winterfell. Jason could feel the confidence with which the Lord of Winterfell carried himself. Lord Stark, please accept the hospitality of House Mallister. Jason opened with the pleasantries offering bread and salt. Lord Mallister, it'd be my pleasure. As the guest rights were given, Jason took note of the gleaming armor the Lord of Winterfell was wearing. Rumors had reached even his ears of the Valyrian steel armor the Lord of Winterfell possessed. He had considered them rumors and talk of misguided small folk, but giving a closer look, he confirmed the validity of those rumors. The Starks have always been held in great regard in Seagard since the Dance of Dragons. Your late brother, Brandon Stark, bless his soul, was a friend of House Mallister. My family bled for him under the unjust heels of the Mad King, said Jason, as he shook hands with Lord Stark. Many good men died under the Mad King, honorable men, Lord Eddard said grimly. It seemed we are to go to war once again, my lord. Aye. Jason could hear the exhaustion in Lord Stark's tone, and he doubted it was solely because of the journey. Any word from King's Landing? Lord Eddard asked, as Jason led the Northern Lord to better lodgings while his sworn lords and knights welcomed other Northern Lords. Lord John Arryn holds the city together. The Knights of the Vale will be riding out of the Bloody Gate to strengthen the capital. The Gulltown fleet guards the Narrow Sea, just in case any dragon loyalists decide to break the King's peace. Jason told what he knew, which was not much. Lord Hoster and Lord Arryn were keeping everything suppressed in the Crown Lands. If there was a rebellion, the two had ensured it will be snuffed out in quick order. What about Robert? Asked Lord Eddard. The king has ridden straight to Casterly Rock, while Lord Stannis has sailed the royal fleet around Dorne. It is hoped the royal fleet will join the Red Wine fleet, and together they drive the Iron Fleet back to their dreary islands. You have certainly done exceedingly well in defending the Riverlands, my lord. We missed the battle by a few days, it seemed. Jason grimly chuckled. We Riverlanders know what it means to be under the yoke of Ironborn. We fought to the last man, and the Ironborn were tough, but when I slew Roderick Greyjoy, they fled instead of continuing the fight. Well, that is a surprise. We could hope Balin sees the error of his ways with one of his sons' death. Jason snorted. I doubt that, my lord. Balin is a stubborn fool with delusions of restoring the old ways of reaving and raping, said Jason, eyeing the armor Eddard Stark was wearing with great interest. I was not aware House Stark holds a Valyrian steel suit of armor. We didn't. It is a recent addition, said Lord Eddard, sparking Jason's curiosity. Not even the Targaryens possessed a full suit of armor made out of Valyrian steel. There are rumors that the purebloods of Volantis possess such relics, but he doubted their claim. If one of the 40 Dragonlord families does not possess such expensive relics of the Freehold, then he doubted some bunch of merchants possessed these precious relics. Ever since the Doom, there have been no new Valyrian steel objects in the world. To his knowledge, only the smiths of Keelhor possess the ability to rework Valyrian steel. Seeing as most surviving Valyrian steel relics are swords and daggers, he found it odd that House Stark possessed a full suit of armor. He knew the Starks possessed a Valyrian steel greatsword named Ice. Maybe the Starks had more Valyrian steel lying around in their ancient castle than that was led to believe. I've heard rumors that there are 2 more Valyrian steel swords as well. Please do indulge my curiosity, my lord. With bleak days ahead of us, your new Valyrian steel collection is something of a strange event that distracts me from darker thoughts and deeds. Perhaps it was his heartfelt plea for something else to bother his mind rather than the grim realities of war that made Lord Stark spill the source of his Valyrian steel. Either way, he could only see truth shining in the man's eyes as the Lord of Winterfell spoke of his gifted second son. If it was anyone else, he'd have thought them a charlatan for claiming their children could produce Valyrian steel. But this was Eddard Stark, and the man did possess a lot of Valyrian steel. He didn't know what to think at this point. On one hand, he felt the urge to see this lad who unearthed the secrets of a lost art, but questions surfaced in his curious mind of how a boy of 6, names days, managed to replicate the greatest work of a long-lost people. The boy didn't even possess a smudge of Valyrian blood in his veins. So, how come a Stark of all people managed to reproduce Valyria's greatest secret technique when those of Valyrian blood had fallen short all these years? It was a query he was sure might remain unanswered for a time. But that doesn't mean he was going to waste such an opportunity to pass. He was going to meet this lad and perhaps even commission a sword for himself as soon as he secured the funds for such a purchase. Jason wasn't quite aware, but his maester was within hearing distance. Not just the maester, but many servants as well. By noon, rumors began to wildly circulate from Seagard. Even a raven took flight to the deep south, where those who claimed dominance over Verity sat assured in their wisdom and accumulated knowledge, and so spun the wheel of fate that governed the chaos of mortal life with utter disregard to the consequences that emerge in the near future. Catelyn worried for her husband. It has been months, and word of Ironborn rebellion was hard to come by, as most of the battles were now fought in the sea. Not to mention, all news has to travel through the neck and make it all the way to Winterfell. She had, of course, kept in touch with her father, and he had kept her appraised of what was going on in the south. Usually, her father would not have done so, but circumstances have changed. She was not the one to start their correspondence through ravens. It was her father who took the first step, and it was evident why very quickly. Her father's inquiries were almost always focused on her Harrion. Her second son's gift in forging Valyrian steel has lit a fire among many nobles of the south. Not a day goes by where Winterfell was not hounded by ravens carrying offers of betrothals for her son. Of course, she was proud as any mother would. She was keenly aware of just how gifted her son was, but she was also aware of just how much danger her son was in. She knew that all the attention her son was garnering would spell doom. The lords of Westeros were easily offended, and it'd only take a simple misunderstanding to offend someone. That offense would later transition into enmity, and she could ill afford the enmity of southern lords while her husband was away fighting a war in the south. Therefore, a better part of her day was spent carefully answering ravens from lords across the Seven Kingdoms. It didn't help that she was always tired and angry with a babe growing in her belly. Maester Luwin was a great help, but the old maester was already busy as it is, burdened with many duties. As if that was not enough, she had to worry about Winterfell's security as well. Harrion's magical powers have attracted northerners from all over the land to flock towards Winterfell. She had to increase the security of the castle and have men regularly patrol all entrances so that nothing bad happens. She would have rested easy if it wasn't for her son's stubborn wanderings around the castle. No matter how much she tried, she could not keep Harrion confined to his room. The boy would always find a way to escape the room and wander around the castle, especially near the First Keep and the Godswood. For some reason, her son had taken to visit the Godswood regularly. She doubted this happened because Harrion suddenly became an old god's devotee. It was something else, but she didn't have the courage to investigate the matter. The Godswood always gave her ill feelings, and so she remained ignorant of her son's newfound interest. Harrion had so far not informed her of his interest when she asked which made her drop the matter for now. When Ned returned, she'd ask him to keep an eye on Harrion's activities in the Godswood. The last thing she'd need is for Harrion to do something with the Godswood and attract the ire of faithful northerners. Letting out a sigh, Catelyn brought her attention back to writing a response to her father's latest raven. Her father wanted Harrion to squire for Edmure. While she loved her father and brother dearly, she was not ready to let go of one of her babies. So, her answer was a resounding no. She'd have screamed that answer on her father's face if he was physically present. Did he think her so stupid that she'd failed to discern her father's true intentions? Over her dead body, would she let anyone make a puppet out of her children? She'd have some words with her uncle if her father was going to persist in attempting to foster Harrion in Riverend. If there was someone she could trust to truly care for her son and teach him all that is to be a knight, then her uncle Brynden would be the man she'd choose. She dearly loved Edmure, but he was hardly someone of knightly renown. Either way, the final decision would be with Ned. Perhaps Ned also had some plans for her children that he had not shared with her. As someone who fostered at the Vale under Jon Arryn, Ned would know more about the matter than she ever could. So she'd defer to her husband on this matter. A knock on the door to her chamber shook her out of her thoughts. "Come in." The door was pushed open, and Catelyn nearly screamed when she saw the person. "My lady, it is I, Septa Mordane." Catelyn had the urge to call the guards, but seeing as two guards were standing behind the supposed Septa Mordane, she was somewhat mollified, but that doesn't mean she was going to allow this abomination to enter her chambers. "Stay where you are. Guards, what is the meaning of this? Who is this woman?" Catelyn shouted at the guards standing behind the creature, and what a wild creature this was, with red horns protruding from its bald head, with skin the color of blood. "My lady, this is Septa Mordane," one of the guards accompanying the creature claimed. "What trickery is this? This is not Septa Mordane." Catelyn screamed at the guards, wondering why they were behaving like simpletons. Couldn't they see the creature with their eyes? She thought, eyeing the creature with apprehension. My lady, I'm Septa Mordain, the creature claimed. Seeing the earnest look on the faces of the guards, she took a closer look at the creature. It was then she noticed several similarities. If the red skin and large bullish horns could be kept aside, the creature looked remarkably similar to Septa Mordain. What happened? How is this possible? It's all because of your son, Septa Mordain claimed, bursting into tears. As the Septa began narrating what happened, Catelyn felt pain flaring across her forehead. Oh, Harrion, what have you done? Catelyn walked through the great keep with purposeful long strides, with Septa Mordain right behind her. As she strode out of the keep, she could feel many eyes follow her, and she unconsciously tucked in her woolen cloak around her body for comfort. The sun was nearly out of the sky, which had placed the castle under the cover of a long shadow. Avoiding all the curious looks, she aimed straight for the courtyard where she found her children surrounded by many of the guards and servants of the castle. Just as she reached her destination, bright balls of light flew high into the air before bursting apart in a shower of sparks. The gathered crowd burst into applause and excited chatter. Once again, several more bright globes of light began to spring up and burst apart in the sky. Getting over the shock at the spectacle, she found her children as the guards made way for her. Right at the center of the crowd were Harrion, Robb, and Sansa. Jon Snow was also there, but she paid no attention to the boy. Just as Septa Mordain warned her, there were 4 stones glowing with symbols carved all around its surface. Everything that she meant to do and was prepared to do fled the moment she took in the excited and happy eyes of other children. Not just her children, but all the others standings around her children. Little Sansa was clapping away, her eyes firmly trained on the sky as multiple colors sprout up in the sky. Robb was looking far too proud and happy, jumping around in excitement whenever the stones on the ground would spit out bright globes of light. Even her husband's bastard looked quite happy, not to mention all the adults were looking to the sky with radiant smiles. She had lived long enough among the Northerners to know how rare they smiled. The North is a harsh place, and the people living here always had far rough conditions to live in compared to the South. So she knew just how rare it was for a Northerner to smile. Even her husband looked cold and disinterested most of the time, and he was the Lord of all the North. Look at this, my lady. Your child is being possessed by a demon. This is witchcraft, and Harrion is possessed by a demonic spirit from the depths of 7 hells. Something must be done. The Septa whispered into her ears, startling Catelyn. She looked at her Harrion, catching his eyes. Her eyes locked into his gray eyes, so similar to her husband, who was far away fighting on a distant battlefield. Out of her 3 children, only Harrion retained the stark look. In a way, Harrion remained a living monument of her marriage, more so than Robb or Sansa. Looking into her second son's bright gray eyes, she could see curiosity shining in them. At that moment, she realized her son was waiting patiently to see how she'd react. She was reminded of Maester Luwin's words that Harrion was far too intelligent for his age. Her son could deduce what was happening, and he obviously knew she was here because of the altercation between him and the Septa. The Septa had tried to intervene to prevent Harrion from teaching Sansa and Robb magic. According to the Septa, she claimed Harrion was teaching her other children to draw runes, the magical language Harrion was using to perform magic. The Septa had tried to drag away Sansa, but Harrion had stepped in. This had caused the Septa to accuse Harrion of committing a sin in the eyes of the 7. The guards accompanying the Septa had so far corroborated the story. The next bit was where the guards and the Septa's explanation left her flummoxed. Harrion had somehow conjured up a stick from thin air and supposedly jabbed in the Septa's direction. Whatever the case, the end result was the Septa's changed demonic appearance. She didn't understand how that happened, but it has happened somehow. The only plausible explanation before her was magic. My lady, your other children will have to be kept away from the demon's influence. It cannot be allowed to live with your children, else it will corrupt their souls. The Septa whispered into her ears, and once again Catelyn found herself observing Harrion, who had yet to look away from her eyes. When their gazes locked, she was suddenly reminded of a conversation they had not too long ago. If your God tells you that someone has sinned just because of the circumstances of their birth, which they had no control over, then that God is evil. Those who believe such nonsense are ill in their minds, and people like them are those who commit the worst of sins. the sin of willful ignorance and blind hatred. Those words were spoken by her son, and those words echoed inside her mind. My lady, you must order the guards to take away the demon. Catelyn surged forward and struck the scepter right across her face with all the strength she could muster. You dare call my son a demon! Know your place, you shriveled old coot! Lady Stark, you cannot, how dare you? The septa mumbled incoherently on the ground, nursing her swollen cheek. You dare order me to lock up my son, take this filth into the dungeons. Come morning, she will be hung for daring to slander and plot treachery against House Stark. Catelyn's order was met with actual cheers and approving comments from the gathered crowd. She was truly stumped on how the crowd reacted. She had thought many would oppose her, or at least request her to reconsider not this outright happiness. This goes to show just how much the people of Winterfell despised the septa, and how ignorant she was to the whole matter. Good riddance to bad rubbish, I say. That hypocrite was strutting around the castle like she had the key to the secrets of the world. That comment came from none other than her son, Harrion. You troublemaker! Catelyn rounded on her son and caught his earlobe between her fingers. Just what is it that you are doing? Why are you always getting into trouble? Let me see whether I can't instill some discipline into you. Catelyn dragged her son away, after the guards dragged a screaming Septa Mordane from the courtyard. She just hoped her husband would return as soon as possible. She needed to have some word with her husband about Harrion's future. Work was progressing at a fast pace, but not fast enough in Tywin's opinion. The Ironborn attack has crippled Dinnersport. His fleet lay broken and burnt at the bottom of the sea. He had invested a lot of gold in building up a strong fleet, and all that work was gone in a moment because of the Greyjoys. He had built the fleet with the Reach and Dorne in mind. The Iron Islands was also an enemy. He hoped to crush in the near future, but before his fleet could achieve the necessary strength, it was burned down. If it wasn't for the fact that most of the sailors and captains perished with the fleet, he'd have hanged them for being criminally negligent. As it is, he lost a lot of gold in building up the fleet, and he intends to reclaim what was owed by the Ironborn at the end of this war. To that effect, work was afoot on restoring the ports of Lannisport, with the Ironborn beaten back to the sea by the concentrated efforts of the Lannister army and some enthusiastic help from the combined Stormland and Crownland armies. The need for a functioning port became all the more relevant. This war was not going to end with just beating back the Ironborn. An invasion of the Iron Islands was imminent. The invasion of the Iron Islands required a large fleet, and thankfully the Red Wine fleet, as well as the Royal fleet, was sailing towards Lannisport. But to facilitate their troops to board those ships, the wreckage surrounding the waters of Lannisport has to be removed. Not to mention, the damages done to the ports have to be reversed in a speedy manner. The good news was that work was progressing and the Ironborn were being beaten back on almost all fronts. The Westerlands has almost completely thrown off the Ironborn to the seas, and the same goes for the Riverlands. Thanks to the timely arrival of those sturdy Northerners, the Riverlords were quickly able to throw off the Ironborn without incurring many losses. Standing atop a hill, overlooking the city of Lannisport, his eyes couldn't help but trace the long line of tents rising up on the outskirts of the city. At the very center, he could make out the gray direwolf banners of House Stark. So, Lord Stark refused to take up your offer to stay in the Rock? Asked Gurion. Tywin could feel a hint of mocking tone from his younger brother, but he chose to ignore that. It has always been Jurion's purview to make a joke or tease him from time to time. He dealt with that by totally ignoring those attempts and instead focused on the important matter. Among his 4 siblings, Jurion was the wildest and free-spirited. Anything he could say to reprimand his younger brother would only embolden the fool. We extended the courtesy to house him in the Rock. It is not our fault. The man preferred to stay with his fellow lords, said Kevin, defending his brother. I heard the king has been spending much of his time with the Warden of the North. Should we be worried? Asked Tyget gruffly. It is only natural. Eddard Stark and Robert Baratheon were fostered at the Vale with this rebellion, threatening to split the kingdoms. The old alliances have to be strengthened, lest the Targaryen loyalists think us weak, said Kevin. I wouldn't worry too much. Holster Tully and Jon Arryn are prepared to knock down any Targaryen loyalists. I'm rather interested in rumors about Lord Stark's suit of armor made of Valyrian steel, said Jurion, looking keenly towards the Stark camp. For once, Tywin agreed with his younger brother's assessment. Not even the famed pureborn of Volantis could claim to own a full suit of armor made of Valyrian steel. Even the Targaryens never owned anything like that, and they were one of the 40 ruling families of the Valyrian freehold. Rumor has it Lord Stark's second son forged the armor and 2 swords with Valyrian steel, said Kevin, eyeing Tywin's firm gaze on the northern camp. Probably these are lies made up by superstitious small folk. Tyget dismissed his 2 brothers with a negligent wave of his hand. There is no smoke without fire. What do you think, Tywin? Asked Kevin. We are one of the richest houses in Westeros, and yet we do not possess a Valyrian steel sword. Even dirt-poor houses like Mormont's possess a Valyrian steel blade. This cannot stand, said Tywin before turning on Geryon. I'm assigning you to oversee the needs of the Northmen. While you treat with our guests, you shall learn of the truth behind these rumors. How do you propose I do that? Lord Stark is not exactly fond of our family, said Geryon, frowning at Tywin. You do what you do best. Just as you befriended the king through wine, do the same with those rowdy northerners. Their tongues will be loose once their belly is filled with the finest wines, said Tywin, directing his gaze back to the northern camp. He had no idea whether there was any truth to these rumors. If there was some truth, then he would ensure House Lannister benefit in some way. It was frankly a ridiculous rumor to begin with. House Stark could not claim any descent from Valyrians, so he doubted their claim. Even so, there have been several rumors behind House Stark, and they were an old house dating back thousands of years. He'd not believe such rumors without proper inquiries. After all, the game always threw in some wild pieces from time to time. Last time it was Lyanna Stark who ended up dismantling the entire Targaryen dynasty. He was curious to see whether another Stark could become a centerpiece in the game.